The Frontier Hope Clinic sat at the edge of Station Kepler 7 like a forgotten promise, its faded sign flickering in the dim light of the outer rim. The station itself was a patchwork of mismatched modules, home to those who couldn't afford the gleaming inner worlds, refugees, laborers, the unlucky souls who'd fallen through the cracks of galactic civilization. Here, in this corner of nowhere, Dr. Marcus Chen had found his purpose again. Marcus stood at the examination table, his weathered hand surprisingly steady as he sutured a deep gash on the arm of a four-armed Tethian dockworker named Kelva. His gray hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and deep lines etched his face, not just from age, but from the weight of memories he carried like stones in his pockets. "You need to be more careful," Marcus said, his voice carrying a warmth that most galactic physicians had trained out of themselves. "That's the third time this month." Kelva chittered with laughter, her mandibles clicking. "My husband says the same thing. He worries too much." "Smart man," Marcus replied, tying off the final suture. "Give him my regards." Rix, Marcus's nurse, observed from her station with compound eyes that missed nothing. She was a Zilthari, an insectoid species known for their rigid adherence to logic and protocol. Her chitinous fingers danced across her datapad, logging the procedure with mechanical precision. "Treatment time, 23 minutes, Rix stated, her translator rendering her clicks into flat, emotionless standard. "Efficiency protocols suggest optimal time is 8 minutes per patient. You are 287% over recommended duration." Marcus smiled as he helped Kelva down from the table. "But she's 100% satisfied, and that's what matters." "Patient satisfaction is not a primary medical metric," Rix replied, though there was something in her tone, a curiosity perhaps, that suggested she was beginning to question her own words. The day continued with its usual rhythm. A Velkari teenager getting vaccinations, trembling with fear until Marcus sat with him and explained every step. An elderly Kryn with chronic pain who needed medication adjustments and someone to listen to her stories about her grandchildren. A Torth engineer with chemical burns who'd been turned away from the station's main medical facility because his insurance had lapsed. Marcus treated them all with the same careful attention, the same genuine concern. It was inefficient by galactic standards, where medicine had been reduced to algorithmic precision, where doctors followed protocols established by AI systems that optimized for resource allocation and statistical outcomes. But Marcus had long ago decided that statistics couldn't capture what it meant to heal. It was nearly closing time when the clinic doors burst open. Two Velkari rushed in, their blue-scaled skin pale with stress, their head crests flattened in distress. Between them they carried a small figure wrapped in blankets, a child, her body trembling with violent spasms. "Please," the mother gasped, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to help her." Everyone else said, "They said there's nothing." Marcus was already moving, his exhaustion forgotten. "Rix, prep examination room 2. Get me a full neural scanner." He guided the parents to the room, gently taking the child from their arms. She was perhaps 8 years old, her scales dull and patchy, her eyes rolling back as another tremor racked her small body. Marcus had seen enough sick children to know when death was waiting in the wings, patient and cruel. "Tell me everything," he said, his hands already checking vital signs, his mind cataloging symptoms with the speed of decades of practice. The father, Korth, spoke through tears. "Her name is Lyra. 3 months ago she started having trouble walking. Then her hands began to shake. Then she couldn't remember things, simple things like her friends' names. We took her to the medical center on Velos Prime. They ran tests. So many tests." The mother, Sella, continued when Korth couldn't. "Velkari neural cascade syndrome. They said it's always fatal. Death within 30 days of diagnosis. They said." Her voice broke. "They said to take her home and make her comfortable." Marcus felt his heart constrict. He knew what those words really meant. Galactic medicine had a cold efficiency to it. Terminal patients received palliative care only because treating the incurable was considered a waste of resources that could save others. It was logical. It was practical. It was monstrous. "How many doctors have you seen?" Marcus asked, carefully examining Lyra's eyes, noting the irregular pupil dilation. 7, Korth said. We spent everything we had traveling to specialists. They all said the same thing. The medical AI classifications are absolute. Terminal means terminal. Then we heard about you, Sella added, desperate hope flickering in her eyes. People said you don't give up, that you treat the person, not the diagnosis. Please, Dr. Chen, she's our only child. If there's even a chance, Marcus completed his examination in silence, his mind racing. The tremors, the cognitive decline, the progressive loss of motor control, it was all consistent with VNCS. But something nagged at him, a memory from another life, another tragedy. Rix, he said quietly, pull up everything we have on chronic progressive encephalitis. Human disease rare. I want comparison models of neural deterioration patterns. Rix's antennae twitched in confusion, but she complied. A holographic display materialized, showing two neural scans side by side, one from the Earth Medical Database, one from Lyra's current readings. Marcus stared at the images, his breath catching. The patterns were nearly identical, different species, different evolutionary paths, but convergent biology had produced the same devastating condition. And if that was true, it might be possible, he whispered. What? Sella grabbed his arm. What's possible? Marcus turned to face them, and in his eyes was something dangerous, hope mixed with determination. 20 years ago, I researched a treatment for a similar condition in humans. It was experimental, never approved for clinical use. But if VNCS and CPE are similar enough at the cellular level, the treatment might be adaptable. Korth's crest rose slightly. Might. I need to be honest with you, Marcus said, his voice firm. What I'm proposing violates multiple galactic medical protocols. The treatment hasn't been tested on Velkari. The approval process would take years, years your daughter doesn't have. If we do this, I could lose my medical license. You could face legal consequences, and if it doesn't work, he looked at Lyra, so small and fragile on the examination table. If it doesn't work, she dies anyway, but at least we'll have tried. The parents looked at each other, a conversation passing between them in silence that only those who'd shared a life could understand. Korth was afraid. Marcus could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his claws clenched and unclenched. But Sella's eyes held a different kind of fire. What good is following the law if our child dies? Sella said, her voice steady. What kind of civilization lets babies die because the paperwork isn't filed? We trust you, Dr. Chen. Rix made a sound like grinding metal. Doctor, I must protest. This violates Protocol 7. No experimental treatment without council approval, minimum processing time 8 to 12 years. Protocol 14. No cross-species medical adaptation without genetic compatibility testing, minimum 3 years. Protocol 22. Terminal patients receive comfort care only to preserve resources for. She's 8 years old, Marcus interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that made Rix fall silent. That is not medically relevant data, Rix responded, but there was uncertainty in her translated voice now. Then medicine is broken, Marcus said simply. He turned back to Sella and Korth. I'll need you to sign consent forms acknowledging the risks. Then we need to move fast. Every day we wait, the syndrome progresses. That night, while the station's lights dimmed to simulate the sleep cycle most species required, Marcus prepared for surgery. The procedure he planned was radical by galactic standards, implanting a specialized port directly into Lyra's neural system, allowing for precise delivery of modified medications to specific brain regions. It was invasive, risky, and completely forbidden by medical protocols that favored less aggressive approaches. But less aggressive approaches wouldn't save her. Rix assisted, her movements precise despite her obvious disapproval. As Marcus made the first incision, his hands remembered the countless hours of practice, the years of training that had brought him to Earth's most prestigious medical institutions before everything fell apart. Why are you helping me? Marcus asked quietly as he worked, his eyes never leaving his task. You think I'm wrong. Rix was silent for a moment, her compound eyes reflecting the surgical lights. Protocol 63 states that abandoning a procedure mid-surgery constitutes medical negligence. Once begun, I am obligated to assist to completion. That's the only reason. Another pause. I have observed you for 3 years, Dr. Chen. Your methods are inefficient and often violate established protocols, yet your patient outcomes exceed galactic averages by 12.7%. Your patient satisfaction ratings are 99.1%, which should be statistically impossible given the diversity of species you treat. There is a discrepancy between protocol and result that I cannot adequately explain. Marcus smiled slightly as he positioned the neural port with microscopic precision. Maybe some things can't be explained by statistics. That is an illogical statement. Welcome to humanity. The surgery took 6 hours. When it was done, Lyra lay unconscious but stable, the port hidden beneath her scales, a lifeline to hope. Marcus stood over her, his back aching, his hands finally trembling now that the crucial work was complete. Phase 1 is done, he said to Sella and Korth, who'd waited outside in agonizing vigil. Now comes the hard part. The treatment will be painful for her. There will be seizures, probably hallucinations as the medications interact with her neural chemistry. It's going to be hell. But there's a chance, Sella said, gripping her husband's hand. A chance is more than anyone else gave us. The next 3 days were relatively quiet, a deceptive calm before the storm. Marcus began the medication regimen, carefully monitoring Lyra's response, adjusting dosages based on neural readings that he interpreted with an intuition that no AI could replicate. The child suffered. There was no denying it, but she was alive, and the initial scans showed the cascade slowing by infinitesimal degrees. On the 4th day, Inspector Thelver arrived. He was a crystalline, his body composed of living mineral that refracted light into cold rainbows. His species was known for their rigid thinking, their belief that order and protocol were the only barriers between civilization and chaos. He entered the clinic with an entourage of recording drones, his faceted eyes taking in every detail. Dr. Marcus Chen, Thelver's voice resonated like struck glass. I am Inspector Thelver of the Galactic Health Council. I have received reports of serious protocol violations occurring at this facility. Marcus straightened from where he'd been checking Lyra's vitals. Inspector, I assume this is about my treatment of Lyra Veltharis. You admit to performing unauthorized Class 7 neural surgery on a patient classified as terminal. I performed necessary surgery to save a child's life. Without approval, using experimental techniques. Crossing species medical boundaries without proper testing. Thelver moved through the clinic, his drones recording everything. Do you understand why these protocols exist, Dr. Chen? To protect patients, Marcus said evenly. Precisely. 4,000 years ago, before the protocols, medical experimentation killed billions. Doctors played God with living beings, trying treatments based on theories and hunches rather than rigorous testing and approval. The protocols ended that chaos. They ensure that only proven, safe treatments are administered. And if no proven treatment exists, what then? Then the patient receives comfort care. It is unfortunate, but resources must be allocated to those who can be saved. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, hot and familiar. She's 8 years old. She has parents who love her. She has a future that doesn't have to end in 30 days if we just try. Your feelings are not relevant, Thelver interrupted, his tone as cold as his crystalline body. Medicine is not about feelings, Dr. Chen. It is about evidence, about protocols established through millennia of research. You are operating on emotion and hope, both of which are poor substitutes for proper medical science. Hope kept her alive long enough for me to try, Marcus shot back. Thelver was unmoved. You have 48 hours to cease all experimental treatment and surrender your medical license for review. If you do not comply, you will be arrested and your patient transferred to a proper palliative care facility. These protocols exist for a reason, Doctor. Your human sentiment does not supersede galactic law. After the inspector left, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the wall where he'd hung his medical credentials. 15 years on this station, building trust, helping people the system had abandoned. And now it might end because he dared to hope. There was a knock on his door. Jayrix entered, followed by an elderly Velkari female whose scales had faded to pale blue with age. Dr. Chen, the old Velkari said, her voice carrying the weight of years. My name is Dr. Tethian. I treated young Lyra at the Velos Prime Medical Center. I was the one who diagnosed her as terminal. Marcus stood uncertain. I don't blame you. You followed the protocols. I told her parents their child would die because that's what the diagnosis matrix indicated, Tethian interrupted. I've been a doctor for 90 years, Dr. Chen. I have watched as medicine became more precise, more efficient, more sterile. We used to make judgments, use intuition developed over decades of practice. Now we consult AI systems and follow protocols because it's safer, cleaner, less legally risky. She moved to the window, looking out at the stars beyond the station. I reviewed your surgical notes. They're brilliant, also completely insane. But I spent last night running simulations using updated Velcari neuroplasticity models, data we've had for 5 years but never integrated into treatment protocols because the approval process is so slow. Your theory about convergent evolution between human CPE and VNCS is sound. More than sound, it's elegant. Marcus felt something cautious stir in his chest. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Tethian turned to face him, and in her ancient eyes was something fierce. Because if you fight the council, I'll testify on your behalf. Someone needs to remind them that we're doctors first, bureaucrats second, and because, her voice softened, I want to see if that child lives. I want to be wrong about her being hopeless. The treatment continued. Days blurred together as Marcus lived in the clinic, monitoring Lyra constantly. The medication cocktail he'd adapted from his old Earth research was complex, 17 different compounds that had to be precisely timed and dosed. Too much and he'd poison her. Too little and the neural cascade would continue its inexorable march toward death. Lyra suffered through it all. Seizures that made her small body arch and twist. Hallucinations that had her crying for her parents even as they held her hands. Fever that spiked so high that Marcus had to pack her in cooling units while her cells burned through the cellular repairs the medication was trying to trigger. Twice, Sella and Korth nearly pulled her out of treatment. The first time was on day 8, when Lyra seized for 40 minutes straight and Marcus had to manually inject emergency stabilizers into her port. The second was on day 10, when the child opened her eyes and didn't recognize her own mother. Both times Marcus sat with them and was brutally honest. It's bad. It might get worse. But her neural scans show the cascade is slowing. Not much, maybe 5% compared to baseline, but it's something. Give me 24 more hours, just one more day. Both times they agreed, though Marcus could see it was killing them almost as much as the syndrome was killing their daughter. Jrix found Marcus on day 11, slumped over his desk at 3 a.m., surrounded by neural scans and empty cups of coffee, a human stimulant that most species considered dangerously potent. You haven't slept in 37 hours, Jrix observed. Can't, Marcus muttered, rubbing his burning eyes. Need to monitor the cascade progression. The next medication adjustment is critical if I get the timing wrong. Why? Jrix asked suddenly. I have observed you with hundreds of patients. You care for all of them, but this case is different. You are destroying yourself over this one child. Why? Marcus was silent for a long moment, staring at the brain scans that haunted his waking hours and his few brief dreams. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with exhaustion and old grief. 20 years ago, I had a daughter, Emma. She was 9 years old when she started showing symptoms of chronic progressive encephalitis, the same disease I'm using as a model for Lyra's treatment. I was a researcher at Stanford Medical Complex, one of Earth's top facilities. I developed an experimental treatment, something radical that I believed could save her. He paused, the memories cutting like fresh wounds even after 2 decades. But Earth's medical boards deemed it too risky. They wanted more testing, more trials, more data. They followed their protocols. By the time they approved a limited trial, Emma was gone. She died while I stood outside her room, holding approval papers that came 6 weeks too late. Jrix's antennae drooped slightly, something that might have been sympathy in a being who claimed to operate on pure logic. And your marriage couldn't survive it. My wife blamed me for not fighting harder, for following the rules. I blamed myself too, still do. That's why I left Earth, why I came here to the outer rim where nobody asks too many questions about a doctor who drinks too much coffee and doesn't sleep. He looked up at Jrix, his eyes red-rimmed but fierce. You asked why this case is different because I couldn't save Emma. Maybe I can save Lyra. That is not logical, J-Rix said quietly. You are projecting personal trauma onto professional judgment. Saving this child will not bring back your daughter. You're right, Marcus admitted. But I'm also right about the treatment. Both things can be true. Sometimes the personal and the professional align, and that's when we have to fight the hardest. On day 13, as the station's morning cycle began, Inspector Thelver returned with station security. Dr. Marcus Chen, the crystalline announced, his voice ringing with official finality. You are under arrest for reckless medical endangerment, unauthorized experimental treatment, and violation of 23 separate Galactic Health Council protocols. Your medical license is hereby suspended pending tribunal review. Marcus didn't resist as the security officers, a mix of species who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, placed restraints on his wrists. Looked back at Lyra's room where Sella stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her blue-scaled face. Continue the medication schedule, Marcus called to her. Every 4 hours the doses are programmed into the system. Don't let them stop treatment. Dr. Chen, Thelver said coldly, the patient will be transferred to a council medical facility for appropriate palliative care. Your experimentation ends now. You're killing her, Marcus shouted as they pulled him toward the door. No, doctor. Her disease is killing her. We are simply acknowledging reality and sparing her further suffering from your futile interventions. As Marcus was led away, he saw his patients gathering in the clinic's waiting area. Kelva the dockworker, the elderly Kryn, the young Velkari he'd vaccinated, dozens of others whose faces he knew, whose stories he'd listened to. They watched silently as their doctor was taken away, and in their eyes was confusion and anger. The holding facility was clean and efficient, like everything else in galactic civilization. Marcus sat in his cell, watching the station through a transparent wall, his mind running through medication schedules and neural deterioration rates. Lyra had been improving, slowly, incrementally, but the data didn't lie. Another 10 days and he might have seen a real breakthrough. Now she'd be loaded with comfort drugs and allowed to die peacefully, another casualty of a system that valued protocol over possibility. He was staring at the stars when J-Rix appeared at his cell door. Visitor hours ended 3 cycles ago, Marcus said without turning around. I have calculated something, J-Rix said, her translated voice carrying an unusual urgency. Based on Lyra's rate of improvement over the past 13 days, if treatment continues for another 10 to 12 days, survival probability increases to 34%. 34%, Marcus turned to face her. That's not zero, that's a chance. Yes, but without your supervision, council doctors will administer only palliative medications. Survival probability returns to 0%. J-Rix's compound eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light. Dr. Chen, I must ask you to do something highly illegal. Marcus felt his heart begin to race. What? I have disabled the security field on your cell. I have also arranged for a maintenance access tunnel that leads back to the clinic. We have approximately 43 minutes before the next security rotation. She paused. I'm asking you to escape custody and continue Lyra's treatment in violation of direct council orders. J-Rix, they'll arrest you too. You'll lose everything. I have considered this, J-Rix interrupted. For 3 years I have observed you violate protocols and achieve superior outcomes. I have watched you spend excessive time with patients and receive excessive gratitude. I have noted that your approach, while illogical by efficiency metrics, produces results that rigid protocol adherence does not. And I have concluded that perhaps logic and compassion are not opposites. Perhaps they are complementary variables in an equation I have been solving incorrectly. She stepped aside from the doorway. Also, I have grown, fond of Lyra. She reminds me of my own clutchmates when they were young. This is not a logical reason, but I find I do not care. Marcus stood, a smile breaking across his exhausted face. J-Rix, you're becoming dangerously human. That is a concerning diagnosis. We should proceed before I reconsider. They made it back to the clinic through the maintenance tunnels, emerging in the storage room where Sella and Korth had maintained a vigil by their daughter's bedside. The parents gasped when Marcus appeared, then Sella threw her arms around him in relief. "We thought they'd taken you away for good," she sobbed. They came to move her, but Dr. Kessian and some other doctors blocked them, said they needed proper transfer authorization. "They're buying us time, but it won't last long." Marcus moved to Lyra's bedside. The child looked worse than when he'd been arrested. Her tremors had increased, her breathing was shallow. The council doctors had already begun cutting off his medication regimen. "How long do we have?" he asked J. Ricks. "Based on current security response patterns, between 3 and 4 hours before they locate you. Then we need to move to the final phase now, tonight." Marcus turned to Sella and Korth, his expression grave. "I was going to wait another week to build up her strength, but we're out of time. There's one more procedure, a neural cascade reversal. I'll essentially reboot her brain's electrical patterns while flooding the system with specialized proteins. It could restore normal function." "Or?" Korth asked, though he clearly didn't want to hear the answer. "Or it could leave her brain dead, but without it she dies anyway. This is our only shot." The parents looked at each other, then at their daughter, then back at Marcus. "Do it," Sella said. "We didn't come this far to give up now." The clinic became a flurry of activity. Dr. Kessian arrived with 3 other doctors, a Crin neurologist, a Torth biochemist, and a human surgeon who'd heard about the case. Even some of Marcus's former patients appeared, offering to help however they could. And standing in the doorway, saying nothing but watching everything, was Inspector Thelver. Marcus met the crystalline's faceted gaze. "Are you going to stop me?" "I'm here to witness," Thelver said neutrally. "The Council wishes to document your failure definitively so that your methods can be formally discredited. And if I succeed, then I will have witnessed something I believed impossible. Proceed, Dr. Chen." "I will not interfere." The procedure room was crowded, too many people for optimal sterile conditions, but Marcus didn't have the luxury of ideal circumstances. He positioned Lyra carefully, connecting her neural port to a complex array of equipment he'd jury-rigged from various medical devices. "This is going to be loud and scary," he told Sella and Korth. "There will be alarms. She might flatline. I need you to trust me and stay back no matter what happens." He began the procedure at midnight. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and Marcus's calm narration as he worked. He'd always been a teacher at heart, and even now, racing against time and law, he explained each step to the doctors watching. "Initializing neural pattern disruption. We're basically creating a controlled seizure that will spread through her entire brain. The key is timing. Hit her with the protein cascade at exactly the right moment when the old patterns are disrupted but before cell death begins." Lyra's body began to convulse. Alarms shrieked as her vital signs spiked. Marcus worked with absolute focus, his hands steady despite the chaos, adjusting electrical frequencies and medication flows with a precision born of decades of practice and desperate hope. "She's flatlining," the Crin neurologist called out. "I know," Marcus said calmly. He grabbed the manual cardiac stimulator, starting compressions. He pumped her 2 hearts in the rhythm unique to Velkari physiology, counting under his breath. The monitor flatlined again. Again Marcus brought her back. Around him, the other doctors watched in horrified fascination. This wasn't medicine as they knew it. This was something raw and desperate and somehow beautiful, a human refusing to accept defeat even as defeat seemed inevitable. 4 hours into the procedure, with dawn beginning to lighten the sky beyond the clinic windows, Marcus administered the final protein cascade. Lyra's body went rigid then still. The monitors showed chaotic neural activity, patterns that looked like electronic noise. Then slowly, the chaos began to resolve. Patterns emerged. The distinctive wave signatures of Velkari brain function appeared, weak but present. "Neural activity stabilizing," J. Ricks reported, her translator failing to hide the wonder in her voice. Marcus stepped back, his surgical gown soaked with sweat, his hands finally beginning to shake. "Now we wait." For 16 hours they waited. Lyra lay unconscious, her body still except for the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Sella held one of her daughter's hands. Korth held the other. Marcus sat in the corner, too exhausted to stand, watching the monitors with red-rimmed eyes that refused to close. Dr. Kessian brought him coffee. "You should rest. Can't, need to watch for complications. You can barely see straight." I'll rest when I know if she lives. The other doctors drifted in and out, checking readings, offering quiet support. Even some of Marcus's patients came by, bringing food and words of encouragement. The clinic became a strange vigil, a community holding its breath together. And Inspector Thelver remained, silent and watching. As dawn light filtered through the clinic windows for the second time, painting everything in soft gold, Lyra's eyes opened. For a moment no one moved. Then the child's gaze focused, traveling from the ceiling to her mother's face. Her mouth moved and a sound emerged, weak but clear. "Mama!" Sella's sob echoed through the clinic. Korth pressed his face against his daughter's hand, his shoulders shaking. Around them, doctors and patients alike wiped their eyes, watching a miracle unfold. Over the next 3 days, Lyra's recovery accelerated. Her tremors disappeared. Her motor control returned. Cognitive tests showed normal function. She was weak, fragile, but alive and getting stronger every day. The child who'd been sentenced to death was learning to walk again, was remembering her friends' names, was asking for her favorite foods. Against every protocol, every statistical model, every certainty of galactic medicine, Marcus had saved her. But the law still demanded its due. The tribunal convened on Station Kepler 7, drawing medical officials and observers from across the sector. Marcus stood before a panel of 5 judges, representatives from the major galactic species, each one an expert in medical law. The chamber was packed with spectators, most of them Marcus's former patients, their faces worried but defiant. Inspector Thelver presented the prosecution's case with crystalline clarity. Dr. Marcus Chen violated 23 separate protocols. He performed unauthorized surgery. He administered untested medications to a minor without proper approval. He escaped legal custody to continue illegal treatment. Each of these violations carries severe penalties, up to and including permanent revocation of medical license and imprisonment. The lead judge, a dignified Velkari elder named High Physician Thora, listened impassively. "Dr. Chen, how do you respond to these charges?" Marcus stood, and when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I don't deny any of it. I broke your laws. I violated your protocols. And I'd do it again because your system was going to let a child die when I knew there was a chance to save her. You could not have known your treatment would succeed," Thora pointed out. "Experimental medicine is restricted precisely because it often fails, causing suffering without benefit. And sometimes it succeeds," Marcus replied. "Yes, there was risk, but there was also certainty, the certainty that doing nothing would kill her. I chose risk over certainty. I chose hope over protocol." "Your personal feelings are not relevant to medical law," Inspector Thelver interjected. "Then maybe the law needs to account for personal feelings," Marcus shot back. "Because medicine isn't just about statistics and protocols, it's about people. Living, breathing, hoping people who deserve more than efficient disposal when they're diagnosed as terminal." The judges conferred quietly. Then High Physician Thora spoke again. "We will hear testimony." Dr. Tethian took the stand first. Her testimony was powerful and damning to the council's position. "I have practiced medicine for 90 years under the current protocol system. I have watched as we became more efficient and less human, forgive the expression. We've created a medical system that excels at treating the treatable and abandoning the rest. Dr. Chen reminded me that our first oath, across all our species, is to heal. Sometimes healing requires breaking rules." Jayrix testified next, her logical analysis devastating. "I have computed Dr. Chen's patient outcomes over 15 years. Success rate, 94.3%, significantly above galactic averages. Patient satisfaction, 99.1%, which should be impossible given species diversity. If protocols alone produced optimal results, then by-the-book physicians should exceed his outcomes. They do not. This suggests protocols are necessary, but insufficient for optimal medical care." The Kryn neurologist who'd witnessed the procedure testified about the brilliance of Marcus's technique. The Torth biochemist confirmed that the protein cascade therapy could indeed be adapted for other cross-species applications. Even some of Marcus's former patients testified, describing how he'd helped them when other doctors had simply processed them through the system. Then Lyra herself was brought forward, walking with her mother's support but walking nonetheless. The judges leaned forward, studying the child who should have been dead. "Can you tell us what happened?" High Physician Thora asked gently. Lyra looked up at the judges with clear, bright eyes. Her voice was small but firm. "The other doctors said I was going to die. They were nice about it, but they said there was nothing they could do. Dr. Marcus said maybe there was something. He said it would be hard and scary, and it was, but he never gave up on me. He stayed with me every day. He held my hand when I was scared, and now I'm alive." She turned to look at Marcus, and her smile was pure sunlight. "Doesn't that count for something, that I'm alive when I shouldn't be?" The tribunal recessed for deliberation. For 3 hours, Marcus waited in a side chamber while his fate was decided. Sella and Korth sat with him, along with Jayrix and Dr. Tethian. No one spoke much. What was there to say? Finally, they were called back. High Physician Thora looked down at Marcus, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Chen, this tribunal has rarely faced such a difficult decision. You clearly violated protocols that exist for important reasons, yet you achieved a result that our best predictive models deemed impossible. You saved a life that our entire medical system had declared beyond saving." She paused, and Marcus held his breath. "However, we cannot simply ignore the law because the outcome was favorable. Therefore, you will receive a formal reprimand that becomes part of your permanent medical record. Your license will be restricted. You may continue practicing, but any experimental treatments must be submitted for expedited review, a process we are establishing that will take weeks rather than years. You will also work with a council committee to develop new protocols for terminal cases where experimental treatment might be viable." Marcus felt relief flood through him, though he kept his expression neutral. "But understand this, Dr. Chen," Thora continued, her voice hardening. "You succeeded once. That does not mean you will always succeed. Protocols exist because for every miracle like young Lyra, there are a dozen failures where patients suffer needlessly from treatments that cannot work. You have been given a chance to prove that your methods can coexist with necessary medical safeguards. Do not waste it." "I won't," Marcus promised. "Thank you, High Physician." Inspector Thelver approached as the chamber emptied. The crystalline stood before Marcus for a long moment, his faceted eyes inscrutable. "You were right," Thelver said finally. "I witnessed something impossible. It has been unsettling." "Truth often is," Marcus replied. "I spent 4,000 years of my species' history believing that chaos ended and civilization began when we established protocols and order. But watching you work, I saw that order and chaos are not opposites. They are," he struggled for the word, "partners," Marcus supplied. "You need structure to prevent harm, but you need flexibility to enable healing. It's a balance, not a binary choice." Thelver's crystalline body refracted the light in what might have been acknowledgement. "I will be filing a report recommending reforms to terminal care protocols across the Council. Your methods should be studied, not suppressed. Perhaps there is wisdom in the human approach after all." He paused. "Though I still believe your coffee consumption is medically inadvisable." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying weeks of tension releasing all at once. "I'll take that under advisement, Inspector." 6 months later, the Frontier Hope Clinic had been transformed. Donations had poured in from across the sector, from grateful patients, from curious medical institutions, from ordinary citizens who'd heard the story of the human doctor who refused to give up. The clinic now occupied 3 times its original space, with modern equipment and a full staff of doctors and nurses who'd come to learn Marcus's approach. But the heart of it remained the same. Marcus still spent too much time with each patient. He still learned their names, their families, their stories. He still drank too much coffee and slept too little, driven by a demon he'd never fully exorcised but had learned to live with. Lyra visited every week, not as a patient but as a volunteer. At 8 years old, she'd become the clinic's unofficial ambassador, greeting nervous patients with a smile and the assurance that Dr. Marcus will take care of you. She was thriving, attending school, making friends, living the life that protocols would have denied her. Today she was helping Marcus with a young Kryn child who was afraid of the injection he needed. She held the boy's hand and told him about her own treatments, about being brave even when you're scared, about trusting the doctors who care. Marcus watched her and felt something in his chest loosen slightly, a weight he'd carried for 20 years becoming just a bit more bearable. He couldn't save Emma. That truth would always hurt, but he'd saved Lyra, and through the new protocols his work had inspired, 17 other terminal patients across the galaxy had been given experimental treatments. 9 had survived, a revolutionary success rate that was forcing medical institutions everywhere to reconsider their assumptions. J-Rix entered the examination room, her data pad in hand. "Dr. Chen, there is a priority message for you. From Earth." Marcus finished the injection and gave the Kryn child a small treat, a human candy that most species found bizarrely pleasant. "What does Earth want?" "The Stanford Medical Complex Board of Directors wishes to name their new pediatric research center after your daughter, the Emma Chen Center for Experimental Medicine. They are requesting that you return to Earth to serve as its director." Marcus felt his breath catch. Stanford, where he'd lost everything. Where Emma had died while he'd held useless approval papers. They wanted him back, wanted to honor her memory, wanted to legitimize the work that had once been deemed too radical. It was everything he'd once dreamed of. Vindication, recognition, a chance to work with unlimited resources instead of making do with donations and jury-rigged equipment. He looked around his clinic, at Lyra chatting with the young patient, teaching him about courage. At J-Rix, who'd learned that logic and compassion weren't incompatible. At the waiting room full of beings from a dozen species who'd come because they trusted him. At the photos on his wall of patients who'd recovered, families who'd been made whole, lives he'd touched in ways that no protocol could quantify. "J-Rix, please send a response to Stanford," Marcus said quietly. "What should I tell them?" Marcus smiled, the decision settling into place with surprising ease. "Tell them I'm honored. Tell them Emma would be proud, but tell them I already have everything I need right here." "You are declining their offer." J-Rix's antennae rose in surprise. "The position would provide substantial resources, prestige, and I'd be treating wealthy patients who have access to a dozen excellent doctors already," Marcus interrupted gently. "Here I'm treating people who have nowhere else to go, people the system forgot. That's where I'm needed." He placed a hand on J-Rix's shoulder. "Besides, I have the best nurse in the galaxy. I'm not giving that up for anything." J-Rix's translator made a sound that might have been the insectoid equivalent of a pleased chirp. "That is a statistically unsupported claim, but I find myself unwilling to correct it." The day continued with its familiar rhythm. A Tethian with a respiratory infection. A Velkari teenager with a broken arm who asked if Dr. Marcus knew Lyra. Everyone wanted to meet the miracle girl. An elderly human spacer with arthritis who reminded Marcus of his grandfather and stayed an extra 20 minutes just to talk about Earth weather and real soil and the smell of rain. As the station's lights began their evening dim cycle, Marcus stood at his office window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Emma rested in a grave he hadn't visited in 15 years, beneath Earth's blue sky. He couldn't change her fate. Couldn't go back and fight harder, break rules sooner, trust his instincts over protocols that valued procedure over people. But he could honor her memory by doing now what he couldn't do then, by being the doctor she'd needed, by refusing to let protocol become an excuse for giving up. There was a knock at his door. A Krathian couple stood there, cradling a small child wrapped in thermal blankets. The mother's face was streaked with tears. "Please, doctor, we've been to 4 hospitals. They all say our son has Krathian cellular degeneration. They say it's always fatal, but we heard about you. We heard about what you did for the Velkari girl. We were hoping." Marcus was already moving, taking the child gently, his trained eye already assessing symptoms and cataloging possibilities. "Come in. Let's see what we can do. J-Rix, I need a full cellular scan and get me everything in our database on KCD. Also pull up human cellular degradation syndrome. I want comparison models." The parents followed him into the examination room, hope and fear warring on their faces. It was an expression Marcus knew well, one he saw reflected in his own memories whenever he thought of Emma. "Is there a chance?" the father asked quietly. Marcus looked at the child, so small and sick. then at the parents who'd exhausted every option and traveled to the edge of civilization on the strength of a story about a stubborn human doctor who didn't believe in impossible. He thought about protocols and rules, about the tribunal's restrictions, and the expedited review process he'd promised to follow. He thought about the 9 patients across the galaxy who'd lived because someone had been willing to try when trying seemed futile. And he thought about Emma, about holding her hand in those final days, about the desperate wish that someone, somewhere would have cared enough to break every rule in existence if it meant giving her one more chance at life. "There's always a chance," Marcus said, his voice firm with conviction. "I'll need to run tests, consult with some colleagues, review research, and I have to submit an experimental treatment proposal to the Council for review. It's a new protocol. But while we wait for approval, we can start with some preliminary interventions, build up his strength, buy time." He met the parents' eyes, and in his expression was something that couldn't be taught in medical schools or encoded in protocols, a determination that bordered on stubbornness, a refusal to accept defeat, a very human conviction that every life mattered enough to fight for. "We don't give up," Marcus said simply. "Not while there's breath in the body and strength in the heart. That's the promise I make to every patient who walks through that door." The Tethian mother began to cry again, but this time with relief. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you." As Marcus began his examination, Lyra appeared in the doorway, drawn by some instinct that told her another child needed hope. She smiled at the sick boy, and in her eyes was the light of someone who'd been where he was and come through the other side. "You're going to be okay," she told him with the absolute certainty of a child who'd learned that sometimes the impossible happens. "Dr. Marcus doesn't give up. He saved me, and he'll save you too." Marcus worked late into the night, running tests and reviewing data, consulting with Dr. Tethian and other specialists across the network he'd built. The Council's expedited review would take 2 weeks, 2 weeks this child might not have. But there were interventions he could start immediately, ways to stabilize and strengthen that fell within his license parameters. It would be close. It would be hard. There were no guarantees, but there was a chance, and for Marcus Chen, a chance was everything. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the station slept and only the emergency lights glowed in the clinic corridors, Marcus sat in his office and pulled up a photo on his terminal. Emma, at 9 years old, laughing on a beach, her hair wild in the wind, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that belonged to children who didn't yet know the world could be cruel. "I'm doing what I can, sweetheart," he whispered to the image. "I know it doesn't change anything for you, but maybe it changes things for them. Maybe that's enough." The photo didn't answer, of course. But in the silence of the clinic, surrounded by the equipment that would help him fight for another impossible case, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He couldn't save everyone. The galaxy was vast and life was fragile, and medicine had limits that even human stubbornness couldn't always overcome. But he could try. He could care. He could refuse to let protocol become an excuse for abandoning hope. And in the end, in this corner of the galaxy where the forgotten and the desperate came seeking miracles, that stubborn human refusal to accept defeat was the most powerful medicine of all. The stars wheeled in their ancient dance beyond the station windows. Another day was beginning. Another patient would need help. Another family would need hope. Marcus Chen stood, stretched his aching back, and poured himself another cup of coffee. He had work to do. In the examination room, a Tethian child slept fitfully, his parents keeping vigil by his bedside. In the waiting area, Lyra had fallen asleep on a bench, her volunteer badge still pinned to her shirt. In the office next door, J-Rix compiled data with meticulous precision, searching for patterns that might unlock another mystery of convergent biology. And throughout the station, throughout the sector, throughout the slowly changing galaxy, word continued to spread about the human doctor who broke the rules, who fought the system, who believed that every life, no matter how small, how alien, how statistically unlikely to survive, deserved someone willing to try. It wasn't the medicine the galaxy had built. It wasn't efficient or protocol-driven or optimized for resource allocation. But it was human, and sometimes that made all the difference. As the first light of the station's morning cycle began to brighten the sky, Marcus returned to his patient. There was work to be done, hope to be fought for, and another impossible case to solve. He smiled, his hands steady, his heart sure. "Let's see what we can do," he said to the sleeping child. "I don't believe in impossible." And in a clinic on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by beings from across the stars, a very human form of medicine continued to challenge the galaxy's certainties. One patient, one hope, one stubborn refusal at a time.